Hello and welcome to week 13. This week we'll be talking about enhancing the interface with a couple techniques. Your book talks about 3 separate techniques, and what we'll be dealing with today is the tooltip technique. I'm here on this page. I went to jQuery.com and then I clicked on a second tab from the left. That's the UI, jQuery user interface. And then I scrolled down on the left, there's a bunch of links. I found tooltip and I came to this page. This is just to give you an idea what a tooltip really is. So you notice here in this text, there's a couple blue words. They are linked to a definition. So when I hover with the mouse over the first one, let's see, there we go. So when I hover with the mouse over the first one, this little tiny box comes up that has a little bit of text. And I can do the same thing on the other one. And that's what we will be working on. As it says in your book, you can actually download the UI library and just with one line get this to work. We're going to do it the hard way just because it's important to understand how these things work, but you will not have to use this for your assignment. Another thing I want to show you still on this page, if we're going to go to tabs, that's another technique. So what we're talking about this week is organizing content on a page, and tabs are particularly useful for that. The idea is not to overwhelm the visitor with too much information and allow the visitor to explore that information on its own. So in this case, what you're seeing here is just gibberish. It's just some Latin text placeholder. But notice the 3 tabs. So you have 3 different topics, let's say, on this page, and then you can, without forcing the user to either scroll down or go to another page, you can let the reader choose what he or she wants to read about by clicking on a tab. The third technique is a content slider, and I brought up on this tab what this anything slider looks like. This is a plugin you'll be working with for your homework. Once you get to the page, to URL indicated in your book, you will notice that the content is moved. There's a link to another page to download it. Eventually, once you have the plugin downloaded, that's what you're going to be seeing if you click on the index.html page. What is a slider? A slider is basically a feature on a page that lets you move forward and backward on certain items. Here I have a video and some text, and I can click on this arrow and it's just an image, not an image. A slide, it can be whatever it's necessary for you. It can be just text, it can be text and image, it can be a video, it can be linked to a song, whatever it is that makes sense to you to have into a slide. So once you open up the zip file that I provided, you'll see there's a couple files in there, tooltip.html and tooltip.css, plus an images folder that really only has 1 file in it. I already opened these 2 files in my code editor, and we're looking at tooltip.html. I also want to show you what it looks like in the browser. Here we go. There's just a bunch of text, and there's a couple of words that has some style applied to them. They are inside a span tag, and when you hover over them, they turn yellow. They also have that dotted line underneath. Same thing here. And let's find them in here. So just to show you, I'm going to fold this code. Just a little bit to organize. Those are the 3 main parts of my body section. So inside the wrapper, I have an H1 tag. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 paragraphs, and a couple words that are inside span tags. This happens to be in the 4th paragraph, and there's another one in the first paragraph. They have a class of trigger. And there's also an attribute called data hyphen tooltip, and refers to an ID of tip 1. So this is not the same thing as an ID. So I'm not giving an ID to this element span. I'm storing an ID inside this attribute. This is a custom attribute that you can use in HTML5. Basically, you can create your own attributes just because they are convenient to store information sometimes. They always have to start with data hyphen, and then you add whatever other word makes sense to you. In our case, is tooltip. So data tooltip stores this ID. Well, that ID refers to an element down here. Is a div with a class of tooltip and an ID of tip 1. So the idea is that when you hover over that particular word with your mouse, then whatever is stored inside the element with an ID of tip 1 will be shown. And same thing here for the second word that refers to an element with an ID of tip 2. It will call this div that has an ID of tip 2 and will show it. And to show it, we'll have to use jQuery to do that. So in the head section, you see that we have a link to a style sheet file, and we have a call to the jQuery library. Plus also we have a call to a file called tooltip.js, which does not exist yet. So that's the first thing we're going to do. We're going to create that file. So in my code editor, I'm going to go up to File, New, and I'm going to create a new file. And right away, I'm going to save it. And I want to save it inside the folder I'm working in. And I'm going to call it tooltip. I guess I have to make sure I spell it right. .js. They're all text file. HTML, CSS, JS. It doesn't matter that extension is different. They're just plain text files. And I'm going to save it right there. Okay, there's nothing in there yet. All right, let's take a peek what I want to do. So when I showed you before, let's go back to the tooltip page on jQuery on the UI library. So when you hover over that word, the little window pops up or shows that has some extra information. And that's exactly what I like to do here. When I go over the specific word with a mouse, I like a little window to show up. And inside the window, I would like to have the content of these divs. Actually, that's a wrong code editor. I would like to have the content of this, for the first word of this div show up, and for the second word for the second div. So I need to gather some information. It's very important that we know. So I like that box. I like the content to show up in a box, and I always has to be reference to the position of this particular word. So working with a first word, I like that tooltip window to show up underneath it. So the first thing I have to find out is where is this word in space with reference to the window space. How far from the top and how far from my left edge. And we know how to collect that information because I gave you a handout, and it also says in your book that there's jQuery methods to collect that type of information. So we're going to come to the code editor and going to go to tooltip.js, and we're going to start with our jQuery function. So I'm going to have my $sign and the jQuery, the word function after the parentheses. I'm looking this up because I never remember. Open and close parentheses after that, and then open and close curly braces, and I got to match the first open parentheses, so I got to close the parentheses and semicolon. Then I separate the curly braces, and here I have my document ready function. All right, so I said I need to find out, first of all, the position of this this word? Where is it in space with respect to the window? How far from the top and how far from the left? So there is a method called offset, and if we go to overapi.com on the jQuery page, if you go where it says attribute and CSS, you can see that this that's where I click, so that's why it has that outline. There's an offset method, and it brings us to the jQuery page about it. And so the offset method retrieves the top and left position of an object with respect to the window. That's exactly what we want. So that's what we're going to be using. All right, so what is the element that we're retrieving? Well, let's take a step back. What am I trying to do? Maybe it's easy if I go back to the browser. Okay, when I hover, that's the first thing we have to figure out. What does the user do? The user is hovering over a word. So my method here, my event, is hover, and I can use for selector class trigger, because both this word and this other word have been given a class of trigger. So if I want to make my code not specific to one word but reusable by other words, I have to think carefully what I use for a selector so it can be applied to multiple elements. All right, so I said I'm going to select an element with a class of trigger, so I can just use that selector. And when I or the user hovers over that, we're going to make something happen. So the event is hover, and we know that hover uses two functions, or takes two functions. So function open close parenthesis, open and close curly braces, and then I have to put a comma, space, and then the same thing, function, open and close parenthesis, open and close curly braces. And I'm going to clean up my code a little bit so it's easier to read. So I'm going to put the word function on its own line indented, and I'll do the same thing for the second one. I'm going to separate the curly braces on the first function, and I'm going to separate the curly braces on the second function. And I have this closing parenthesis, semicolon, belong to the hover event. So I like to have them, this is kind of up to you how you do that, but I like to have these closing parentheses matching the beginning here, so it's easy for me to see where this whole block of code starts and where it ends. So visually I can pick it out immediately. All right, so when the user hovers over the element with a class of trigger, what happens? Well, I like to collect its information as far as distance from the top and distance from the left side of the window. So I could say this, meaning the element I hovered over, offset. Okay, that retrieves that information, but I got to store it somewhere. So I'm going to store that information in a variable. So I'm going to use the word var, and I'm going to create a variable to hold that information, and I'm going to call it, give a general name, trigger POS, for trigger position. So to rephrase that, I'm going to collect so I'm reading from right to left. I'm going to collect the top and left position of the element that's been hovered over, which happens to be an element with a class of trigger, and I'm going to store it inside a variable that is called trigger pause. Okay, that's the first step. Now I also, to be able to have basically this is giving me, for picking this point right here in the top left corner, and it's telling me, okay, this particular point is so many pixels distant from the top of the window and so many pixels distant from the left edge of the window. So I'm basically getting the coordinates of that top left corner of these. You can imagine that every element in HTML, it's a little block. So if you imagine a little rectangle around that word, it's giving you the position of the top left corner. Now, if I want to put the position of, if I want to place the tooltip below that, I got to find out some other information. I got to find out how tall is this imaginary box around this word. Because depending on the font that is being used or on the font size, the size of that box will change. So I better retrieve that information. So let's go back to the code here. Okay. So I want to retrieve the height of the element that's been hovered on, and I want to use the outer height, which is the height plus the padding plus the border size. So I'm going to say this. I guess I did something wrong here. I'm supposed to use my parentheses. That's how we do that. And we'll see how to do it a little better. This outer height, it's a method, so I have to use parentheses. Okay, so I'm retrieving this way. Now I got to store inside something. I want to store inside a position, sorry, a variable. So I'm going to use the word var, and I'm going to store it inside trigger height. I'm actually going to simplify that and just call it trigger h, because sometimes it can be really tricky when we use a word like height. So I'm going to make it a little bit easy for myself. So I retrieved the total height of the element I hovered over. In this case happens to be an element with a class of trigger. And I store that information inside a variable called trigger h. And since I'm doing this, and I probably will need it, I'm going to do the same thing with the width. So I can just copy and paste this and just change outer height to outer width, meaning the full width of the element, including padding and border, and I store inside a variable called trigger w. And just to see what we're doing, I want to display some of this information. So for example, we can use an alert, and we're going to display trigger h, and I'm going to make it really easy. I'm going to copy and paste this and display trigger height. Now if you read the chapter, you realize, something is not quite as it's not quite done as in the book. So notice what is happening. We were using the word this 1, 2, 3 times. So when you have a selector, meaning we have a $, parentheses, inside the parentheses, some element you're looking for, you're forcing the jQuery function to be run, and that requires quite a bit of browser time. So what the book is saying, if you are to repeat a selector more than once, you're better off storing the selector inside a variable. So that's what we're going to be doing. So we're going to store this inside a variable. So this search, I'm going to store it inside a variable called this. It can be really confusing to do this way, but it's that's the standard, and it's just be patient with this. It takes a little bit of time to wrap your head around this. So now I have a jQuery object called this. The $sign in front of it, it's not necessary. I think I explained before that you could write this this way, a lot of this. That would be I better use var in front. So I could write it this way and it'll be fine. But I want to remind myself that this variable is actually a jQuery variable. So the convention is to put a $sign in front of it. So now I only have to run this jQuery function once because it retrieved that element. Now I can use this jQuery object simply like this, and my code will be much more efficient. meaning I don't have to run the jQuery function every single time. Okay, so for now, when I hover over something, we retrieve information, and when I move away from that element, when I hover away, nothing happens. Let's just see if if the code works and catch any mistakes I might have made. So I'm going to save this, go back to my browser, make sure I have Firebug working, and already have the code validator showing. And remember, to have the code validator, you have to have the web developer toolbar showing right here. You go to tools and you click on display page validation. That brings up another toolbar here that has that check mark when your code is valid. Now I'm going to reload this. All right, remember that why nothing's happening? Because this only happens when you actually hover over the element. So let's hover over this word. And here we go. So this is giving me the height of my element. And this is giving me the total width of my element. So this gives us the information about the trigger, but we also need to find out information about the size of the div that we would like to show. Let's go back to the code. And there's something else that I just noticed that hopefully you caught. One of the things I said is that in jQuery you put a $sign in front of a variable name to indicate that that is a jQuery object. But when you actually, so in this case it makes sense because we're saving inside this variable $sign this object. But on this other line, it doesn't make sense because we're using the object to retrieve, no, it makes sense here, sorry, because retrieving an object has a top and left information. But below here, with outer height and outer width, we're actually retrieving just a number. So it's not a jQuery object. So really, I should not use that $sign in front of that variable name. And I should remove it from here as well. So when I look at this, right away I can tell, okay, this is a jQuery object, this is a jQuery object, and this is just a regular variable. As I said, with this method, outer height and outer width, we're treating just a number. Okay, well, we don't need the alert anymore. I'm going to add a comment here to explain what we're doing. So we are, say, get dimensions, get position and dimensions. So position and dimensions of trigger. So as if our first step, what we need to do next, as I said, is get the dimensions of the tip, the tool tip. So I'm going to enter the comment that says get dimensions of tool tip. Okay, that tooltip is stored in a div. We have two different tooltips. So we need to retrieve the dimension of the tooltip that corresponds to the ID number, stored inside data-tooltip. Go back to that ID. So let's see how we retrieve it first. So we're going to use this because we're still inside a function, so we can still use it, meaning the element we hovered on. And we're going to use the attr, the attribute method. And what we're going to retrieve is the attribute called data tooltip. So whatever is stored inside the attribute called data-tooltip is retrieved, and we got to store it, and we are storing it inside a variable that I'm going to call tip ID or tooltip. Let's see, tooltip ID. Okay, and so get them. So that was our first step. So once we have that, we can use that information to retrieve the height and the width as well. So we're going to store inside tip height. So remember that this is just an ID. It's not actually a jQuery object. So what we would do normally is have that information inside the parentheses and do, so this is the height, so we're going to say outer height. So that retrieves whatever the outer height of the element with an ID of tooltip. And probably we would have to have, see, I'm getting a little bit confused here. So I don't remember if I have to use, well, probably can just check that. Okay, probably it will work like that. I was wondering, will it work without having the hash mark in front of it? Why don't we just test it? So whenever I have a question like that, the best thing I can do is just, create an alert and see what I'm retrieving. So once again, my question, okay, I retrieve the ID. Oh yes, I know it will work, and I remember now, because what is stored inside data-tooltip, it's this string right here that actually has a hash mark. So that will work. I have forgotten that I added that. I thought I only added the name of the ID, but I actually added the hash mark. So really I don't need this because I know it will work. Okay, and then I'm going to get the width as well. So I'm going to copy this line and paste it and change tip H tooltip, I guess. It will make more sense. Tooltip height and tooltip. I really cannot spell when I'm talking. Tooltip width, and I'm getting the outer width. Okay, and the same deal here. Notice how we are calling, we have the jQuery function twice. So it probably would be a good idea to store that information inside a variable. So we're going to create a variable that it's going to have a $sign and going to be tooltip. And that tooltip, and it's going to be, there we go. We're going to put this information, I'm going to copy here and paste it inside. So now here, instead of running the jQuery function twice, I'm just going to call the tooltip. Okay, copy and paste below. All right, so I ran a jQuery function on this element with an ID of tooltip 1, and I'm storing that jQuery function search inside a variable, and this happens to be an object, so I have my $sign in front of it. So I'm going to use that to retrieve a number, the full height, and I'm storing that number inside a variable called tooltip H, and I'm doing the same thing for the full width, and I'm storing that inside a variable called tooltip W. So that is the dimensions of the tooltip. All right, a little bit more thinking here. Okay, so I know the position. Let's go back to the browser for a second. So I know the position of this word. Okay, maybe I shouldn't hover with it. I know the position of that word. I know how tall and wide it is, although I probably don't care about how wide it is. Now I can just position my tooltip absolutely with CSS, and I can tell the top is equal to the top of this word plus the height of that word. So they will position just underneath, and because I retrieve the full height including padding and border, that's the border right there, they will be able to place it just underneath that. And I'll do the same thing with the left position. So going back to the code, now I'm going to position tooltip. All right, so I'm going to position the tooltip. So I'm going to use that object. I'm going to say CSS. And inside the CSS, if I use more than one property and value combination, I have to use curly braces. So open and close curly braces. So I'm going to say, I'm going to break this on a few lines so it makes it a little bit easier to read. I'm going to say position and colon absolute. I need a comma after because I add some more. So if I was doing this just in plain CSS, I would just say position absolute without the quotes. But in jQuery, you need to use quotes. I'm going to say that the top is equal to the top of my trigger, which is trigger age, plus the height of my trigger. Actually that's the height of the trigger. So let me back up. So the top of my trigger, the trigger position is the object that has that information. So I'm going to use $trigger position and then enter .top. That will give me the, because that is an object, so that will give me the top position of my trigger, and I'm going to add the height of the trigger. And I have to remember that this needs probably pixels. You're probably better off, yeah, I'm probably better off calculating this outside this just to make it cleaner. So I'm going to add a little bit more code here and say calculate tooltip position, just because you don't want to do that inside CSS. So I'm going to copy all that. And actually I'm going to remove it from here. Bring it here. And I'm going to store it inside a variable that says tooltip top. Okay. And I'm going to use that inside my CSS. So I'm going to copy this. I'm going to position and I'm going to place it right there. And I do not need parentheses because it is sorry, I don't need quotes because it is a variable. But what I need to do is to add the units. So I can add them right here, or since yeah, probably is the best thing. So I'm adding to strings, so I use a plus sign and I'm going to enter pixel px. Okay, and comma. So this will read whatever number it's calculated for tooltip top. Remember, no $sign because this is just a number. It's not a jQuery object. And the units are here. And then we have to give the left position. And the left position is equal to the tooltip left. Actually, the trigger position to the left. So I'm going to enter trigger position dot left, and I have to add again the units, and that should be it. Okay, that decides or that sets the position, but it's not in the CSS, in tooltip CSS. I made those tooltips invisible by setting the display to none, so I can fade it in right now. So I can keep on adding here because remember, so these are doing method chaining. So if that makes more sense, I could do something like that. I have that on a separate line. I'm going to indent it a little bit. Maybe not delete it. Oh, I can do that. I guess I have to do one line by line. Okay, so this is that's what I'm selecting, the tooltip. This is the first method I'm applying. And then on its own line, I'm going to say fade in. And I'm going to make it fade in. I could just do this and be fine, but I want to make it fade in fairly fast, so I'm going to choose 250 milliseconds, so that should make it fade in fairly fast. I have a feeling I made a whole bunch of mistakes, so we'll see what happens. I'm going to save this and go to my editor and reload. Alright, so I should have removed the alert, so when I go over this, nothing happens. Time to have our Firebug open and see what I did. So let me reload this. Okay, I didn't match the quote. I know there was something, probably just the first on many. Okay, let's match the quotes here and save. Let me try that again. It actually worked. Okay, so that's what I wanted to see, that the tooltip shows up once I hover over an element with the class of trigger. Now let's see if it works on the other one, and there it is. And now they stay there because we haven't set up our second function. That's a function that is run when you hover away from the element. So all is left to do is for that tooltip to fade out when we hover away from that word. So let's go back to our code, and I'm going to copy this. So I'm selecting a tooltip. I'm say when I hover away, well, just fade out. And you could make it fade out at the same speed, so maybe we can just enter 250 here as well. It's just a quarter of a second. Now that makes really much of a difference. Save that and go back to the browser. I'm going to reload that. Okay, I fade over my word, and the tooltip shows up. And when no, I did not. Tooltip is not defined. Oh, I see. Yes, because that variable, that's very interesting. It's funny, even after a long experience, you still make certain mistakes like that. But what is different after many years, your rationalizing of your mistakes, it's a little bit faster. So what happened here? This variable called tooltip only lives inside the first function. So its scope is only internal to the function. And it's really not a big deal because I don't need the second function. I can just select any element that has a class of tooltip and make it fade out. So if it is already invisible because it's the display set to none, well, it won't be affected. If it is visible, it will fade out. Save that and go back one more time. So when I go over the word, the tooltip shows, and when I move away, it fades out. And let's see if it works on the other one. Here it is again, and it fades out. And that should conclude this demonstration. As I said, this is just really for your own information to understand how to use certain things like inner height, outer width, and so forth. And also to give you an idea of what is underneath the hood for the method that you can use in the UI jQuery library. You probably wouldn't want to use your own tooltips unless you already have created it and you want to do something special. It's probably easier to use the library. But then again, this is a good exercise, and hopefully we're able to follow along. And I already shown you what the plugin for the homework looks like. Once again, it's anything slider. Some of the information or some of the requirements I gave you for the homework might not necessarily apply. One of the things I asked you is to remove the drop shadow. This is from last year when I taught this class, so I just wanted to see that you can customize the plugin to your needs, and especially get rid of the top and bottom border for each slide. There's also some other customization. I'm asking you to do it. If there are any questions about it, just shoot me an email and let me know, well, okay, you asked me to do something that's not even there anymore, so just clarify for me. And I think that's it. Until next time.